A glass shattered against a kitchen floor in a Brooklyn apartment. A man's hands were shaking so hard he couldn't hold his own water. Tomorrow morning, he would walk into a federal courthouse and testify against the people who made entire neighborhoods go silent at the mention of their name. He was Russian. He was connected, and now he was a snitch. Here's the thing about the Russian mob: they didn't just punish informants, they erased them. After the Soviet Union collapsed in the early 90s, Russian organized crime exploded across American cities. The FBI knew they needed insiders to bring these networks down, just like they'd done with the Italian families using RICO. So they offered deals, protection, new identities through WITSEC, the federal witness program run by the U.S. Marshals. But the Russians played by different rules. Their network stretched across continents. Men like Vyacheslav Ivankov, arrested by the FBI in 1995, had loyalists from Moscow to Miami. Snitching on people with that kind of reach meant your new name and new town might not be enough. Some informants survived. Many simply vanished. And the FBI's 56 field offices couldn't watch every shadow. Stay with me on this one. The man standing in that Brooklyn kitchen was Nikolai Petrov, not his real name. Not anymore. His real name had been buried 6 months earlier inside a sealed federal file that only 4 people in the United States government were supposed to have access to. Nikolai had spent 11 years working as a mid-level money handler for a network that moved cash from Brighton Beach through chain of front businesses in South Florida and back to accounts in Cyprus. He wasn't a killer. He wasn't muscle. He was the guy who made the numbers disappear, and that made him more dangerous to his bosses than any triggerman. Because the money was the proof. The FBI had approached him 2 years before that night in the kitchen. 2 agents, one older, one younger. They sat across from him at a diner on Coney Island Avenue and laid it out plain. They knew about the Cyprus accounts. They knew about the car washes in Hallandale Beach. They knew about the jewelry store on 18th Avenue that hadn't sold a single diamond in 14 months. But somehow reported 6 figures in revenue every quarter. They had bank records, they had wire transfers, and they had Nikolai's signature on enough of them to put him away for 30 years. The older agent, a man named Frank Mara, didn't threaten. He didn't raise his voice. He just slid a photograph across the table. It was a picture of Nikolai's daughter at a school playground in Staten Island. She was 7. She was on the swings, and the message was clear. Not a threat from the FBI. A preview of what Nikolai's bosses would do to his family if they found out how much the feds already knew, and decided Nikolai must have been the leak. Believe me, Nikolai understood that math instantly. He agreed to cooperate. The deal was standard on paper. He would wear a wire for selected meetings. He would provide transaction records. He would identify the people above him in the network, the men whose names never appeared on any document. In exchange, the FBI would recommend a reduced sentence. And when the testimony was done, the U.S. Marshals would relocate him and his family under WITSEC. New names, new city, new life. For 16 months it worked. Nikolai recorded conversations. He handed over flash drives. He sat in a windowless room at the FBI's field office in Lower Manhattan and identified faces in photographs, connecting names too. Accounts to properties, properties to people who had never been charged with anything. The case grew. It expanded from Brooklyn to Florida to Nevada. 3 federal prosecutors were assigned. A grand jury was convened in the Eastern District of New York. And then somebody talked. Nikolai never found out who. The FBI never confirmed it either, at least not to him. But 6 weeks before the trial date, things started to shift. A car he didn't recognize parked outside his apartment building for 3 straight days. Different driver each time. His daughter's school called to say a man had come asking about pickup procedures, claiming to be an uncle. Nikolai didn't have a brother. The marshals moved him that same week. Emergency relocation. No 2-week notice. No packing up the apartment. Nikolai, his wife Anya, and their daughter were driven to a safe house in New Jersey at 2 in the morning, with garbage bags full of clothes in the trunk. The apartment in Brooklyn was cleaned out by a federal team the next day. Now here's the thing. WITSEC is considered the most effective witness protection program in the world. Since it was formally established in 1971 under the Organized Crime Control Act, no witness who followed the program's rules has ever been killed. That's the official statistic, and it's true as far as it goes, but it comes with a very large asterisk. The rules are brutal. You cut off all contact with everyone you've ever known, every friend, every cousin, every person who ever mattered to you outside your immediate household. You don't call. You don't write, you don't send a birthday card, you don't attend funerals. Your mother dies, you don't go. That's the deal. Because one phone call, one letter, one moment of weakness is all it takes to unravel the entire thing. Nikolai's wife, Anya, understood this intellectually. Emotionally, it destroyed her. She had a sister in Rego Park they'd been close with since childhood. She had an elderly father in a care facility in Sheepshead Bay. She was told she could never speak to either of them again. The marshals gave her a phone number for a program counselor. That was the support system. One phone number. But the immediate problem wasn't emotional. It was logistical. The trial was still 6 weeks away, and Nikolai had to remain accessible to the prosecutors. That meant he couldn't be sent to a new city yet. He was stuck in a holding pattern, a safe house in northern New Jersey with U.S. Marshals rotating shifts outside. The safe house was a 3-bedroom colonial on a quiet street in a town I won't name. The neighbors thought the new family was part of a corporate relocation. The cover story was simple. Nikolai was an IT consultant. Anya was a homemaker. The daughter was enrolled in a local school under a temporary name. For the first 2 weeks, it was calm, unnervingly calm. Nikolai met with prosecutors 3 times, driven in unmarked vehicles to the federal building in Manhattan. He reviewed documents. He practiced his testimony. He identified more photographs. The lead prosecutor, a woman named Catherine Alcott, told him his testimony was the backbone of the entire case. Without him, they had financial records, but no one to explain what they meant. Nikolai was the translator between the paper trail and the jury. He asked her once what would happen if he didn't testify. She looked at him for a long moment and said the case would likely collapse. 18 months of work. And the people he'd informed on would know he'd cooperated but never followed through. The worst of both worlds. All the danger, none of the protection. So he was going to testify. That was settled. What wasn't settled was whether he'd be alive to do it. On the 14th night at the safe house, Nikolai woke up at 3 in the morning. He couldn't sleep. He went downstairs for water. That's when the glass shattered. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. He stood in his kitchen in the dark, glass on the floor around his bare feet, and he realized something that landed on him like a physical weight. He was not afraid of dying. He was afraid of what would happen to Anya and his daughter after he was gone, because WITSEC protects witnesses. Once the witness is dead, the obligation gets complicated. His family might be relocated. They might be given new identities, but they'd be alone. No community, no language. Anya's English was functional but limited. Their daughter was 7. They'd be dropped into some town in the middle of the country with nothing and no one. Nikolai cleaned up the glass. He wrapped his hand where a shard had nicked his palm. He sat at the kitchen table until the sun came up. That morning, 2 things happened that changed everything. The first was a phone call from Frank Mora, the FBI agent who'd recruited him. Mora told Nikolai that a witness in a related case, a man who'd been cooperating with the FBI's Miami field office on the Florida end of the same network, had been found dead in his apartment in Coral Springs. Shot twice, once in the mouth. The signature was unmistakable, the Russian word for silence. The second thing was smaller but in some ways worse. Nikolai's daughter came home from school and said a woman had been waiting outside the fence at recess. The woman had waved at her. The woman had called her by her real name, not her new name, her real name. Nikolai called the marshals immediately. Within 40 minutes, 2 additional deputies were stationed at the house. Within 2 hours, the daughter was pulled from the school. Within 6 hours, the family was moved again. This time to a different safe house, farther from the city, in rural Pennsylvania. A farmhouse on 12 acres with a security perimeter. Now I need you to understand something about how this works in practice, because it's not like the movies. In the movies, witness protection is a clean operation, professional, seamless. In reality, it's a bureaucracy under impossible pressure. The U.S. Marshals Service runs WITSEC with a dedicated unit, but resources are finite. There are, at any given time, roughly 18,000 witnesses and family members in the program. 18,000 people living under false identities across the country, each one a potential security breach. The marshals assigned to Nikolai were competent, but they were also handling other cases. The lead inspector, a man named Dale Vickers, had 11 active protectees on his caseload. 11 families, all with different threat levels, different locations, different needs. Vickers was good at his job, but he was one man and the people looking for Nikolai had resources too. The move to Pennsylvania bought time, 3 weeks. The trial was approaching. Nikolai was driven to Manhattan twice more for final preparation with the prosecutors. Each trip required a security detail, a different route, counter-surveillance vehicles. It was expensive, it was exhausting, and every time he left the farmhouse, the risk multiplied. Anya stopped sleeping. She sat in the living room with the lights off, watching the driveway through the window. She didn't say much. When Nikolai tried to talk to her about what would happen after the trial, after the relocation, she just looked at him with eyes that had gone flat. She'd stopped crying 2 weeks earlier. That was worse than the crying. Their daughter, though, this is where it turns. Their daughter adapted. Kids do that. She found a cat in the barn behind the farmhouse. She named it something Russian that the marshals couldn't pronounce. She drew pictures at the kitchen table. She asked when she could go back to school. She didn't seem to understand that back to school would mean a different school in a different state with a different name. Or maybe she understood perfectly and was handling it better than both her parents. 4 days before the trial, Nikolai was brought to the federal building for one final meeting. Catherine Alcott, the lead prosecutor, walked him through his testimony one more time. Every question, every expected objection from the defense, every document he'd need to identify. She told him to speak slowly. Look at the jury. Don't look at the defendants. He asked her if the defendants would be in the courtroom when he testified. She said yes, all 4 of them, including the man Nikolai had reported to directly for 7 years, a man named Viktor Morozov. Nikolai said nothing for a moment. Then he asked if the courtroom would have bulletproof glass between the witness stand and the defense table. Alcott paused. She said no. There would be armed marshals. But no glass. On the morning of the trial, Nikolai put on a suit the marshals had bought him from a department store in Allentown. It didn't fit well. The shoulders were too wide. The pants were an inch too short. He looked at himself in the bathroom mirror of the farmhouse and almost laughed. He was about to testify in the most significant Russian organized crime case in the Eastern District in a decade, and he looked like a man going to a job interview. He already knew he'd fail. The drive to Manhattan took 3 hours, 2 vehicles. Nikolai rode in the back of an armored SUV with Vickers and another deputy. Anya and his daughter stayed at the farmhouse with 2 marshals stationed inside. They entered the courthouse through a basement garage. Nikolai was taken to a holding room on the 4th floor. The room had a table, 2 chairs, a bottle of water, and no windows. He sat there for 90 minutes before they came to get him. Walking into that courtroom was the longest 30 feet of his life. He saw them immediately. The 4 defendants at the defense table, suits far better than his. Viktor Morozov sat on the far left. He was 62, silver hair, calm face. He looked at Nikolai the way you'd look at a waiter who brought the wrong dish. Mild annoyance, nothing more, but Nikolai knew better. Behind that calm face was a man who had ordered at least 3 killings that the FBI knew about, and probably a dozen more they didn't. A man who had once, according to a recording Nikolai had made, described a murder as taking out the recycling. Nikolai sat down in the witness chair. He stated his name, his real name. It was the last time he'd ever use it in public. The questioning began. For 2.5 hours, Catherine Alcott walked him through it. The accounts, the transfers, the front businesses, the hierarchy, who reported to whom, who authorized what. Where the money came from and where it went. Nikolai spoke slowly, the way she'd told him. He looked at the jury. 12 faces, most of them trying hard to follow the financial details. A few of them glancing at the defendants with expressions that ranged from curiosity to something close to fear. The defense attorney, a sharp-voiced man named Kaplan, tried to rattle him on cross-examination, called him a criminal himself, called him a liar who'd sold out his associates to save his own skin, pointed out that Nikolai had personally laundered over $40 million. Asked him how many laws he'd broken. Nikolai answered everything directly. Yes, he was a criminal. Yes, he'd laundered money. Yes, he'd broken the law. He said it all without flinching, because Alcott had prepared him for exactly this approach. The most dangerous moment came near the end of the cross. Kaplan asked Nikolai if the FBI had threatened his family to get him to cooperate. Nikolai said no. Kaplan asked again, rephrasing. Nikolai said no again. Kaplan looked at the jury and said, So you're telling this court that you voluntarily chose to betray the men who trusted you for over a decade. Nikolai looked at him. Then he said, they trusted me with their money, not with their conscience. I never had one of those until my daughter was born. The courtroom went quiet. Kaplan moved on. Nikolai testified for a total of 4 hours across 2 days. When he was done, the marshals moved him out through the basement again. Back into the SUV, back on the highway, back to the farmhouse. He thought it was over. The testifying part anyway. He thought the hardest thing was behind him. He was wrong. 3 days after his final testimony, while the trial was still ongoing with other witnesses, Nikolai got a call from Vickers. The deputy's voice was different. Controlled in a way that meant he was working hard to keep it that way. Vickers told Nikolai that a sealed court filing, a document that contained Nikolai's real name and the general region of his temporary relocation, had been accessed from a computer at the federal courthouse. The access was logged. It came from a login assigned to a clerk in the Eastern District. The clerk's name was Dmitry Polenko. Polenko had been born in Odessa. He'd been a naturalized U.S. citizen for 12 years. He had a clean record, a solid work history, and absolutely no reason to access that particular file. Except one. Vickers didn't say anything else for a moment. Then he told Nikolai that Polenko had disappeared, left his apartment in Queens 2 days earlier and hadn't been seen since. His phone was off. His car was still in the parking garage. Nikolai felt something cold settle in his chest, not fear exactly, something past fear. The recognition that the system he'd trusted to protect him had a hole in it, and the people hunting him